In the winter of 1838, federal soldiers moved through the mountains of North Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee, and Alabama, rounding up more than 16,000 Cherokee men, women, and children at gunpoint. They were marched at gunpoint over 800 miles to Indian Territory, what is now Oklahoma. A quarter of them died on the way. It became known as the Trail of Tears, but not everyone walked it. Some families hid in the mountains, some negotiated exemptions. Some assimilated so completely that within 2 generations, their own descendants no longer knew what they had survived. Their names changed, their language disappeared, their identity was folded quietly into the surrounding white communities of Appalachia in the South, and it stayed hidden there for almost 200 years. 15 surnames are in this video. Some belong to families who hid in caves rather than surrender. Some belong to a man who negotiated with the United States Army and bought his people's freedom with his own money. And one belongs to a warrior whose death saved the tribe most Americans today associate with Cherokee heritage. Is one of these names in your family tree? Stay with me. Subscribe right now before we start. Subscribe, hit the bell, and stay with me. Number 1, Tsali. Tsali was an elder Cherokee man living along the Nantahala River when the removal began. In November of 1838, soldiers came to move his family west. During the roundup, a struggle broke out and a soldier was killed. Tsali and his sons fled into the mountains with a small group of Cherokee who refused to be taken. For weeks, the army searched the Smoky Mountains for them without success. The terrain protected them. The caves and ridgelines that white soldiers did not know how to navigate became their only defense. Eventually, an offer was made. If Tsali surrendered, the remaining Cherokee hiding in the mountains would be allowed to stay in North Carolina permanently. Tsali agreed. He turned himself in with his sons, knowing what would happen next. He was executed by firing squad in December 1838. His death became the bargain that allowed hundreds of Cherokee families to remain in their homeland instead of being forced to Oklahoma. The Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, the federally recognized tribe that exists today in western North Carolina, traces its right to remain directly back to the agreement bought with Tsali's life. If your family has roots in the Nantahala or Snowbird Mountain communities of North Carolina, Tsali is not just a name in a history book. He is the reason your ancestors were allowed to stay at all. Number 2, Thomas. William Holland. Thomas was not Cherokee by blood. He was a white store owner and legislator from Jackson County, North Carolina, adopted as a boy into the tribe by the principal chief himself. He grew up speaking Cherokee fluently and spent his adult life as the tribe's legal advocate in dealings with the United States government. When the Indian Removal Act threatened to force every Cherokee in the region to Oklahoma, Thomas used his own money and legal standing to purchase land in his name on behalf of Cherokee families who had no legal right to own property as tribal members. That land became the foundation of what is now the Qualla Boundary, the home of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. Thomas negotiated directly with federal officials and the Army, arguing that a group known as the Oconaluftee Cherokee had never signed the removal treaty and held prior legal claims to their land that predated it. His argument worked. Because of one white man's legal maneuvering and his own money, over 600 Cherokee people were exempted from forced removal entirely. Thomas later became the second principal chief of the Eastern Band, the only white man to ever hold that position. If your family history includes the surname Thomas in western North Carolina with any connection to Cherokee ancestry, there is a real possibility that connection runs through the man whose legal work created the Eastern Band as it exists today. Number 3, Junaluska. Junaluska was a Cherokee warrior who had fought alongside Andrew Jackson at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend in 1814, helping to defeat the Creek Nation in a battle that made Jackson a national hero. Junaluska personally saved Jackson's life during that fight. 2 decades later, the same Andrew Jackson, now President of the United States, signed the order that forced Junaluska's own people from their land. Junaluska reportedly said that if he had known what Jackson would do to the Cherokee, he would have let the Creek warrior kill him at Horseshoe Bend. Junaluska was forced west on the Trail of Tears, but later made his way back to North Carolina, one of the very few people recorded to have walked the trail west and then returned east on foot. The town of Robbinsville, North Carolina, sits on land tied to his story, and his descendants remained in the Snowbird community for generations. If your family has ties to the Snowbird Cherokee community in Graham County, North Carolina, Junaluska's story is very likely part of your lineage, whether the name survived in your family tree or not. Number 4, Ross. John Ross was the principal chief of the Cherokee Nation during removal, and unlike most of the men in this video, his story runs directly through Oklahoma rather than around it. Ross was 7/8 Scottish by blood, and only 1/8 Cherokee, educated in white schools, and yet he became the most powerful political leader the Cherokee Nation ever had. He fought removal in the United States Supreme Court and won. In Worcester versus Georgia in 1832, the court ruled that Georgia had no authority over Cherokee land. Andrew Jackson ignored the ruling entirely. Ross led his people west on the Trail of Tears, losing his own wife Quoddy along the journey when she gave her only blanket to a sick child and died of exposure and pneumonia. Ross rebuilt the Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma and led it for nearly 40 years. If your family history connects to Cherokee Nation citizenship through Oklahoma rather than North Carolina, John Ross is very likely part of the political and genealogical structure your ancestors lived under. Number 5. Adair. The Adair surname appears repeatedly across Cherokee historical and genealogical records from the earliest trader rolls of the 1700s through the Dawes Rolls compiled at the turn of the 20th century. The name traces to James Adair, a Scots-Irish trader who lived among the Cherokee in the 1700s and married into the tribe, whose descendants became one of the most prominent mixed Cherokee and European families in tribal history. Adair descendants appear on the Trail of Tears itself, in Cherokee Nation government positions in Oklahoma afterward, and in the Indian Pioneer Papers, an oral history project that recorded over 11,000 interviews with Cherokee families in Oklahoma in the 1930s. The pattern with the Adair name is instructive for anyone researching their own family. A European surname does not rule out Cherokee ancestry. It is often the strongest evidence of it because intermarriage between Cherokee women and European or Scots-Irish traders was common throughout the 1700s and 1800s, and the children of those marriages carried their father's surname while remaining fully recognized as Cherokee by blood and by community. Number 6. Benge. The Benge surname is documented extensively in Cherokee genealogical records, appearing in the Dawes Roll, the Guion Miller Roll, and multiple Cherokee family research guides as one of the core surnames of mixed Cherokee ancestry. The family descends from Robert Benge, sometimes called Captain Benge, a Cherokee war leader of mixed Cherokee and European descent, active in the late 1700s along the Virginia and Tennessee frontier. His descendants scattered across the same regions that later saw removal, and the Benge name appears on removal-era rolls and in Oklahoma tribal records afterward. If the Benge surname appears anywhere in your family tree alongside roots in the Cherokee homeland regions of Tennessee, Virginia, or North Carolina, it is one of the more genealogically documented paths back to confirmed Cherokee ancestry that exists in the historical record. Subscribe right now because the next 9 names cover the family that hid an entire church congregation from federal troops, the surname connected to the only man legally allowed to stay behind because of a treaty loophole no one else knew existed, and the name of the woman whose grandmother's silence was the only inheritance she ever received. Subscribe, hit the bell, and stay with me. Number 7. Welch. The Welch or Welsh surname appears in North Carolina Cherokee communities connected to Tsali Welch, a Cherokee woman known historically as Beloved Woman, Nancy Ward's relation through marriage, whose family bridged Cherokee leadership and white settler communities in Tennessee before removal. Families carrying the Welch name in the Appalachian region often trace to mixed marriages during the same period that produced the Adair and Benge lines, where a European surname masked what remained culturally and by blood a Cherokee family for generations, after the name itself no longer sounded Cherokee to outside observers. Number 8. Bushyhead. Jesse Bushyhead was a Cherokee Baptist minister who led one of the actual detachments on the Trail of Tears, personally responsible for guiding hundreds of his own congregation members on the forced march west. He preached to his people during the journey, buried the dead along the roadside, and continued serving as a religious and community leader once the group reached Indian territory. His son, Dennis Bushyhead, later became principal chief of the Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma in the 1880s. The Bushyhead name is unusually well documented because Jesse kept detailed records of births, deaths, and marriages during the removal itself, records that historians still use today to trace the exact experience of the detachment he led. If your family carries the Bushyhead name and traces to Cherokee Nation Oklahoma records, you're very likely connected to one of the most thoroughly documented family lines to survive the entire removal process. Number 9. Van. The Van family was one of the wealthiest Cherokee families in the Southeast before removal, descended from James Van, a Cherokee chief of mixed ancestry, who built a plantation estate in Georgia so large it became known regionally simply as Diamond Hill. His son, Joseph Van, inherited the estate and was forcibly removed from it during the Georgia Gold Rush era, when white settlers seized Cherokee land ahead of the official removal date, using the discovery of gold as justification to push Cherokee families out early. The original Van house in Georgia still stands today as a historic site, documenting one of the wealthiest and most politically influential Cherokee families of the pre-removal era. Number 10. Rogers. The Rogers surname connects to Clement Van Rogers, a prominent Cherokee rancher and politician in Indian Territory whose son became one of the most famous entertainers in American history. Will Rogers, the humorist and film star of the early 20th century, was one-quarter Cherokee through his father's line, tracing directly back to Cherokee families who survived removal and rebuilt in Oklahoma. Will Rogers spoke publicly about his Cherokee heritage throughout his career at a time when few public figures did so, making the Rogers name one of the more visible Cherokee surnames in 20th century American culture, even though most Americans who watched his films and read his newspaper columns never connected the name to the Trail of Tears at all. Number 11, Sequoia. Sequoia, also recorded in English records as George Guess, was a Cherokee silversmith who never learned to read or write in English, yet single-handedly created a complete written syllabary for the Cherokee language in the early 1800s, working largely alone over the course of roughly a decade. His syllabary allowed the Cherokee Nation to become one of the only Native American nations with a fully literate population within a single generation of contact with a written language, and it was used to print the Cherokee Phoenix, the first Native American newspaper in the United States, beginning in 1828, just before removal began. Sequoia himself moved west before the forced removal and spent his later years in Indian Territory and eventually Mexico, searching for a group of Cherokee who had migrated west even earlier. His name survives today, most famously attached to the giant sequoia trees of California, named in his honor by a botanist who considered his intellectual achievement equivalent to the scale of the trees themselves. Number 12, Ridge. Major Ridge and his son, John Ridge, were among the most politically consequential and most controversial Cherokee leaders of the removal era. Believing that removal was inevitable regardless of resistance, the Ridge family signed the Treaty of New Echota in 1835, the very treaty that legally authorized the Trail of Tears, without the authorization of the tribal council or principal chief John Ross. The treaty was signed by a minority faction, who believed cooperation would preserve better terms than continued resistance. Most of the tribe considered it an act of betrayal. Under Cherokee law at the time, signing away tribal land without authorization carried a death sentence. In 1839, after the Ridge family had resettled in Indian Territory, Major Ridge, John Ridge, and their relative Elias Budino were all assassinated on the same day by Cherokee men enforcing that law. The Ridge name carries one of the most painful and divisive stories in all of Cherokee history, a family that believed it was saving its people and was executed by its own nation for the attempt. Number 13, Budino. Elias Budino was the editor of the Cherokee Phoenix, the newspaper printed using Sequoia's syllabary, and a cousin of John Ridge who signed the Treaty of New Echota alongside the Ridge family, sharing their belief that removal could not be stopped and their fate on the day of the assassinations in 1839. Budino had been educated in New England, adopted the English name of a prominent American statesman who sponsored his schooling, and used his position at the newspaper to argue publicly for the treaty faction's position before his death. His descendants carried the Budino name into Oklahoma, and the story of his life remains one of the most studied examples of the impossible choices Cherokee leaders faced in the years before removal, when every available option seemed to lead to the same loss. Number 14, Walking Stick. The Walking Stick surname is distinctly associated with Cherokee families who remained in the eastern mountains rather than being forced to Oklahoma, appearing frequently in Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians enrollment records tied to the Qualla boundary in North Carolina. Unlike surnames such as Ross or Ridge that carry a single defining historical figure, Walking Stick represents something more common in Cherokee genealogy, a family name that persisted quietly across generations without a single famous ancestor attached to it, surviving simply because the family itself survived, hidden in the same mountains that sheltered Tsali and the Oconaluftee Cherokee who never left. Number 15, Owl. The Owl surname appears throughout Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians records and modern tribal enrollment in North Carolina, another family name tied not to a single dramatic historical event, but to the simple fact of endurance. Families carrying the Owl name are documented across multiple generations of Qualla boundary residency, church records, and 20th century tribal rolls, representing the thousands of Cherokee families whose survival did not make it into history books, but whose names are preserved today in the tribal enrollment records of the Eastern Band. Still living on the same land, their ancestors refused to leave nearly 200 years ago. 15 surnames. The elder who was executed, so his people could stay in their own mountains. The white lawyer adopted into the tribe, who spent his own fortune buying his adopted people's freedom to remain. The warrior who saved Andrew Jackson's life and lived to watch that same man destroy his nation. The chief who won in the Supreme Court and lost his wife on the road anyway. The trader families whose European names hid confirmed Cherokee bloodlines for 2 centuries. The minister who buried his own congregation along the trail and kept the records that still document it today. The wealthiest family in the nation, stripped of their estate before removal even officially began. The rancher's son, who became one of the most famous men in America and spoke of his heritage when almost no one else did. The silversmith who gave an entire nation the ability to read and write in one generation. The family that believed cooperation would save their people and was executed by their own nation for the attempt. And the surnames that carry no famous story at all, only the plain, undramatic fact of a family that refused to leave the mountains and is still there today. If your family has roots in western North Carolina, eastern Tennessee, northern Georgia, or northeastern Oklahoma, there is a real possibility one of these 15 names is somewhere in your family tree, whether you have heard the story or not. The Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians maintains enrollment records searchable through their tribal offices in Cherokee, North Carolina. The Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma's Dawes Roll is fully searchable through the National Archives at catalog.archives.gov. And the Guion Miller Roll, with its detailed genealogical applications from over 47,000 claimants, is available through FamilySearch and the National Archives for anyone researching a family line that may not appear on the more commonly cited rolls. The names are in the records. The stories are waiting, and they are older and harder and more remarkable than anything most people were ever taught about what happened in those mountains in 1838. Subscribe right now if this video showed you the Trail of Tears in a way you had never seen it before. Every week on this channel, we go this deep into the real histories behind the families and bloodlines that survived the hardest chapters of American history. Subscribe, like this video, hit the notification bell, and leave a comment below. Is one of these 15 names in your family tree? Do you know which Cherokee community your family connects to? North Carolina, Oklahoma, or somewhere in between? Tell me the surname and how far back you can trace it. And if you have used the Dawes Roll, the Guion Miller Roll, or Eastern Band enrollment records to confirm the connection, tell me that too. This is where the real conversations happen on this channel. Share this with every family that has always said there was Cherokee ancestry somewhere without ever being sure if it was real. Because the records are free and the stories behind the names are more remarkable than most people were ever told.